The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
Welcome to an episode of the Minnesota Soccer Podcast, in which Tom Schreier and I have been sitting and looking at our cell phones for the last 20 minutes.
It's been a while. We almost...
You texted me at 3:30.
I did.
And I pulled in the parking lot right then.
Yeah.
We good. We met up at the studio. Had a chat with Dane Moore. Shout out to the Dane Moore NBA podcast.
Yeah, we just recorded that. Just talked about free agency, the draft picks, all that stuff.
And Nic Hallett, who, as you'll recall if you listened to last week's episode, is on vacation somewhere. Supposed to call in this week.
He's probably at, the Wisconsin Dells.
He's probably somewhere. For future reference listeners of the show, we are calling Nick Carmen San Diego Hallett moving forward.
The government may start
shout out to the rest of you 90s kids. I know you're out there.
God.
So Tom and I are going to talk about soccer, and it's going to be fun.
Do we want to reveal who is in this building right now?
My fiance is in the building and is busy and is not coming on the pod yet. We're not that desperate yet.
Listen. This is like a soccer game. We may have to reevaluate at halftime.
We may have to bring on a sub at halftime. So we may have a podcast debut with my fiance.
It may happen.
It may happen.
Nick might call. Who knows? God knows.
So we're gonna talk about some stuff. I want to start with what I think is the biggest story related to Minnesota soccer, which is not the game last night, but the announcement that happened before the game, which is Collin Martin yesterday morning at about 10 o'clock tweeted and announced that at the game last night, which was Pride Night for Minnesota United, he was announcing that he was an openly gay professional athlete in American sports, which he is now that he has announced that he is the only active gay male athlete in the top 5 American professional leagues. He's the only one. The last one before him was Robbie Rogers, who retired after the 2017 season, which played for LA Galaxy, missed the entire 2017 season through injury. He's the first player to announce this, kind of in the prime of his career. I wrote a piece about this on zonecoverage.com. I put in all of his comments from last night and the video of his comments after the game last night, which were wonderful, and you should absolutely watch them if you're anybody. I don't know why you'd be listening to this podcast if you're not a student soccer, but they're well worth watching just kind of in general. And I went back and kind of put the comparison up between Collin Martin, in terms of the stage of his career he's at, and Robbie Rogers, Michael Sam, and Jason Collins.
Which real briefly, that'd be Collins was the end of his career, right?
Collins was at the very end of his career. He played 1 year after. He was a free agent when he made the announcement, played 1 year, 22 games for Brooklyn, and retired the next year.
And ironically, your St. Louis Rams.
My St. Louis Rams
drafted Michael Sam, but
in the 7th round, but he never played a game in the NFL. He was cut from the practice squad, played for a couple practice squads, and played a little bit in the CFL.
Yeah. Was a little undersized and all that, but I think still you have to give him credit that there are NFL teams who probably were hesitant to draft him, and the Rams did pull the trigger there.
And the Rams pulled the trigger in the 7th round, yep. And then Rodgers was an interesting one because he made the announcement in February of 2013 on his website, and while doing so stepped away from the game of soccer because he was, at the time, I think he was playing for Leeds United in England and was not confident about the reception he would get. Ended up returning to the game, signing with LA, and playing for the Galaxy for 4 years. Had a very successful career, multi-time U.S. international, both before and after the announcement. But it was one of those things where it came at a different point for him. Collin Martin is 23, is a 6-year MLS veteran, homegrown player, came up through DC United, played there for 4 years, has played for Minnesota for the last season and a half now since they came into MLS. And notionally for a soccer player is in the prime of his career, albeit he's not a star player across the league. He's not like on your Giovincos, your Carlos Velas, your top of MLS, much less top of the global scale. But he's a player who will likely be in MLS for 6, 7, 8 years, maybe more to come from that. And making this decision now when he's 23, just fighting first place in the team, doing what needs to be done, like it's different. And I want to like acknowledge that everyone, like, you've seen all the words about bravery and about that. It did when I wrote my piece last night and checked the numbers. The tweet that he'd made yesterday morning had like 60,000 likes on it.
Jeez. And
it's like you've seen it everywhere from soccer media to all other professional sports media to actors, TV hosts. Like the one I saw was James Corden last night tweeting about it.
Wow.
Like
he probably will end up on a late night show at some point.
You'd have to think so, and it's interesting for a dude who like is fighting. Like we've talked on the pod the last couple of weeks. I've been impressed with his play the last month. I wanted him to start this game.
A little surprising that he didn't.
A little surprising that he didn't play. I thought he should have come on the pitch tactically last night. Like
let alone to let the fans.
We'll get to the game in a second, but I thought that he should have appeared last night because of the merits of what he's done on the pitch this season. And like it's just it feels different than the last couple times, both because like there's a degree of fanfare to it, but there's also just kind of I'm a guy and I'm doing this and now this is normal.
Yeah, I think of all the leagues to do it, it seems like the most. They make it very clear they want anyone to come out of the game. They're not trying to. I've sat at a few games. I know you guys are up in the press box. I've gone to a few, and you do just see different races, probably different lifestyles. Like just soccer's a multicultural game, right? And it seems to have brought that out in a microcosm here in Minnesota.
Well, and not just MLS as a league, but Minnesota United specifically.
Yeah,
the club has done a wonderful job of embracing openness and equality for all and acceptance and being a part of that. This, I think, is like the 4th or 5th time they've hosted Pride Night going back to their USL days. Heath and Martin both talked about the club specifically, their support for them, the people support for them, the organizational support for them. You see social media interactions. Nearly every single MLS team reached out and was involved talking about the Collin Martin, talking about Martin's announcement.
And it seems like his teammates as well. I mean, I know that the uniform they were going to wear anyways had the rainbow numbers, but it was a good look of solidarity. Yeah. And it sounds, you would know better, you're in the locker room, but it sounds like they have been supportive throughout this process.
Well, and that was the thing that he said kind of in the multiple media he's come across in, is that this isn't new to his teammates. Like his teammates in DC had known. He told his teammates in Minnesota when he moved to Minnesota at the start of 2017 season. Like, it's not news to anybody close to him. It's just like this is the time to make it public. And now, after a brief intermission, we welcome to the show longtime contributor Nic Carmen Sandiego Hallett.
Nick, explain yourself, sir. Explain yourself. It is 4 p.m. We had a 3:30 podcast. We nearly put Faith on the podcast.
We did almost put Faith on the podcast.
I think we should have given Faith a chance.
She's busy. She's doing work.
I wish you guys would have had faith in Faith. You know what I mean?
Naylor keeps on going back to that. Like, Faith has to work. She's like eating a Snickers bar in the cafeteria right now.
She's doing grad school work and is more educated than any of you knuckleheads. Anyway, Nic Hallett, welcome to the show.
All I have to say is I think we all know that sometimes lake time is a little different than land time.
Nick, I think Nick time is different.
I was going to say, I think Nick time is the different scale here we're talking on. You don't get to talk about lake time. You got your own. All right.
Fair enough.
So, Nic Hallett, we were in a conversation before you called about everything surrounding Collin Martin's decision to come out as the first actively gay athlete in MLS. What were your thoughts when you heard the news yesterday?
It was surprising. It wasn't, it's so interesting, and I'd be interested to hear, you being able to kind of get more information on this in the last few days, David. But it's so interesting to me that, Minnesota United has basically been, sitting on this, and Collin's been sitting on this and waiting for this timing. And, I mean, it's very cool because of the timing, right? Doing it with this game that's supposed to be the Pride game, and then also doing it, in the time of the year and across the country that Pride is celebrated. So it's just interesting how they've kind of timed it. But I think it's awesome, and I think it's so cool. It shows what's so great about it is, soccer is a sport that's very all-inclusive because so many nationalities take part in it, and the World Cup is obviously a current example of that. But that community that soccer builds is a very much a global one, and I think that spreads to sexual orientation too, and that's so great that, again, soccer just works as a shining beacon of inclusivity.
Yeah, and that's kind of the place we got to. Like, Robbie Rogers obviously has probably been the highest profile player to play as an out athlete, because he did play for the 4 years in MLS that he played, and it just seems like it. The thing for me that I think is interesting is I tried to write about this a little bit, but I didn't feel like I could write about it like justly with the amount of time that I had to get a piece out. It feels like this makes more sense in MLS than it does anywhere else in the world.
Yes, for all the reasons that I just
because we can talk about
soccer's just
we can talk about soccer being inclusive, but it works here where some other places with different impacts on and different like fan perceptions or whatever might react less well to this.
Yeah, for all the reasons that I said, I think soccer's has to deal with all different types of places and environments that aren't accepting of different nationalities, different races, and what have you. And soccer, it's just not even an option because you need all these other countries to make it work. And that's what's so great about it, and that's why it works on a lot of levels.
I wonder, among American pro leagues, I think any league would, or at least openly they present that, like, we would take, gay players in the league and that they'd be accepted. However, I think the NBA probably would be the most, when you factor in fan base, all that stuff, it seems like they'd be kind of the most willing and accepting, where we had used Michael Sam as an example when the St. Louis Rams took him. Again, I think there's organizations in the league that if you have the skill, you can play. But certainly among the fan base, we've seen, we don't need to go all the way down this rabbit hole, but we've seen that different views aren't always accepted. And certainly I think that would translate to people in the stands perhaps being harder on a player if they came out than in Major League Soccer, where it seemed it was overwhelming support, at TCF Bank Stadium, on Twitter. Places that, large crowds full of drunk people and Twitter aren't always the most friendly environments for anyone, let alone someone who's really taken a step like this.
What is kind of amazing is to think is, like, I don't know of anyone who's done this, abroad, like in any of the other pro leagues, pro soccer leagues. And that's kind of startling when you think about it. I mean, just statistically, there must be numerous gay players in soccer and all the other sports. And so it's kind of amazing that Collin is just alone on this island.
Yeah, and Collin talked about that a little bit in his comments to media after the game last night. The quote that lines up is, "I think there's definitely some more professionals out there that have probably been in my situation, and I'm not here to tell them what to do. Everyone works on their own timeline, but I think we still have some improvement to make. It's still kind of crazy to think that I'm the only out gay man in the 5 major league sports in America. There's more of us out there, and I think that's what Robbie Rogers was alluding to earlier in the month or 2 months ago. It's just like, hey, where are you guys at? It's been 4 years since Michael Sam, and so I think it's time, more so than professionally, but for other people in general. Like, he's aware of it, and he knows that this is going to make him maybe not the only, but the first, if that makes sense.
Well, and so what was your sense then, David, on how for those other individuals that aren't coming out, what was the sense from Collin's take on it all, that they do that because it's hard enough to be, trying to be a pro athlete, that they don't do it because they just want to avoid having to add that extra stress or that extra baggage, so to speak? What was his sense on if it added any pressure to him?
I think that he was aware that it's going to change, if not the pressure on him, then the perception of him in particular. And like I think it's going to be interesting to see like what his profile across the league is moving forward. In terms of, like, he's a dude that's, like, he's a fringe starting 11 player for a bad MLS team that was never a big prospect. He's been an MLS player for 6 years, but he's still really young, was a homegrown player with DC United. And, like, you look, I wish I could see how many Twitter followers he had before he said what he said yesterday morning, because he probably had, like, 5,000. Like he's a dude who if you like deeply follow MLS or Minnesota United, and that's about it. And so I'm curious how that's going to change in terms of like his visibility, because he and Eric Miller and others have been like active supporters of Athlete Ally and other stuff during Pride Month in this year and years past, and that obviously that's not going to change with him being out, but it's like, by virtue of him being who he is and making this public, he almost becomes like an extremely important voice.
I also wonder when... Go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say, I mean, again, though, if you look at it from the perspective of like trying to be a gay athlete and trying to make it to the top of your sport, like you can just see, it's so easy to see. It's like, I've got enough to deal with that to try to throw that out and have that be public information can only be added weight, I would think. But I mean, credit, and that's why it's so more credit to Collin. And obviously, you would hope, and it would appear, we're moving towards a society where that stops being a weight and just starts being another, thing about you, like your height and your weight.
Because that's the thing is, like, Collin made sure to emphasize that he was the first out gay man in professional sports, with emphasis on man. Like,
yeah, because the WNBA
it's common in the WNBA
and very accepting,
and the NWSL. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, I was one of I saw a news story this week in WNBA coverage that I think Sue Bird and her significant other were the first, like, to
body issue,
but the first couple to be in the body issue, or like same-sex couple to be in the body issue.
Yeah.
And this week there was a game in the WNBA. I forget the teams and I forget the players involved, but it was the first time a married couple had played against each other in
I did not know that.
sport. That was a thing that happened this week.
That's awesome.
So it's one of those things that, like, that's just run-of-the-mill stuff in women's sports.
I guess, and kind of along those lines, I think when Michael Sam came out, there was reports, it was all anonymous, that other NFL players were planning on kind of coming out together in solidarity with him. I understand we kind of went through this before you were on, Nick, that he, like a lot of seventh-rounders, was cut from the Rams, ended up kind of floating around for a little bit, but never had, a very long career in the NFL. But I wonder if there'd be a domino effect. If we'll see more MLS players, if we'll see people in other leagues, again, it's a little harder kind of traversing league to league, but I just wonder within MLS if you'd see kind of a movement here.
I would think not, though. That's the thing. I would think not, because the Robbie Rogers 4 years ago, him coming out was so massive. It was very much like this. And the prevailing thought was the same then, was, oh my goodness, like, now we're going to see this regularly. Every few months, we're going to hear of a new person. We're going to start hearing about maybe in the NHL and in the NBA. And it never happened. So I don't see that happening, I guess, is my take.
Mm-hmm. And it's that was kind of the place that I got to with it last night, because you look at Collins, Sam, Rogers, all of them coming out happened within a calendar year of each other in 2013, 2014.
Yeah.
And then Robbie Rogers played out his career. The other two faded out of their playing careers respectively, and that was it. Like it.
Yeah, so how do you guys view Jason Collins, let's say, or kind of those players? Like, do they stand out to you? Does it only come up when something like this happens? I just feel like their profile is certainly like a Jason Collins, like, well, significantly more than if he had.
Martin name-checked Michael Sam last night. Like, it still matters to people, and people are still going to know those names for years to come, especially, like, in the sphere of knowledge where this is something that deeply matters to you, which obviously, like, holding aside someone's personal life and sexuality, any of the players in the MLS, which there's a long list that worked with Athlete Ally this month and worked to help fundraise and do stuff with that for MLS's Pride Month, that's like, there's a lot of people who are invested in this cause. And you know those names. You know the Robbie Rogers. You know Michael Sam. You know Jason Collins. You know Justin Fashanu. Like, these are things that you know. And so, I don't know. I don't know what is coming. I think that I wouldn't necessarily take as much of a it's not going to happen line, but I completely agree with Nick. Is this happened before, and it almost seemed like an even bigger deal with Robbie Rogers, because like Robbie Rogers, when he came out, he was a multi-time United States international. He was playing in England. Like, he was a big deal player. And I don't know. Maybe, like, and in some ways, maybe it's better that a guy like Collin Martin, who's just like kind of an average run-of-the-mill MLS player, who's going to play probably the rest of his career and do fine, be a bit part starter on maybe this team, maybe another team. Maybe it's okay for just a normal guy to be just a normal guy.
Yeah, and I would say the last thing I would say on like the whole group, and like thinking back on Sam and Rogers, is what's even maybe more admirable what they did is, I think, and I'm kind of speculating, I could be wrong, but it felt like both with Rogers and Sam that they did it at a time that they knew they were going to potentially be out of the spotlight soon. So they wanted to do what they could for the gay cause at that time. Rogers knew he was at the tail end of his career and had just a few years left, but he was still a name. So him doing it then had lots of weight. Michael Sam, in the most macho sport imaginable, knew he might not break into the NFL and be a regular. So he did it early and came out early, trying to start a movement. And I think that's what they've done, is they've tried. It hasn't maybe had the domino effect they had hoped or intended necessarily, but they've still taken gay athletes, to a new level, and that's very commendable.
Yep. So that's what it is. I'm going to be very interested to see how, like, what happens moving forward in the short term and the long term for Collin Martin. I hope I am at the stadium the first time he actually plays for Minnesota United. With no inside knowledge at all, I have a feeling it might be on Wednesday, not least because as we transition to talking about the game on Friday night, Rasmus Schuler did leave the game on Friday night with some muscle tightness. Seemed like it would be precautionary. Heath was very optimistic about the outcomes for him moving forward, but when you've got a hole in the midfield right there, you got a home game coming up in 5 days from their previous game and another one 3 days after that. They're going to have to do some squad rotation this week, and I have a feeling that Martin plays on Wednesday, and I think that's going to be very special. So, with that said, United did play an actual game on Friday night. Collin Martin did not play. He maybe should have. Minnesota United lost to FC Dallas 1-0. And I strongly feel, as I wrote in my recap of the game last night, which is also on zonecoverage.com, that this was one of those games that the scoreline does not justify how close this game was and how dominant Minnesota United were for large portions of it. Nic Hallett, your take.
I mean, I completely agree. That is the narrative of this game. Is, coming away from it and looking at the scoreline, it's kind of maybe what you would have expected. But United played spectacularly at times, and we're desperately unlucky to end up not only without any points, but to lose a game. It's fascinating. I mean, I would be fascinated to hear from you, David, about what the mood in the stadium was like throughout, considering how this game went.
It was like it was just so many. Everything was so close. Like that's the biggest thing to emphasize. If you didn't watch this game, I cannot express to you how close United were to scoring goals at probably 8 or 9 times in the second half alone. Like inches away on shots, on crosses, on passes, on everything. It was like they were as close as you can possibly get to scoring a goal, and it just would not go in. Like it, and you felt it in the stadium. Like that was, I think I actually wrote a tweet last night right before Dallas scored, because United from minutes like 50 to 56 had 4 golden clear-cut chances to score a goal. 1 to Christian Ramirez, 2 to Ibson, and 1 to Darwin Quintero, and I forget the other player who was sliding through the box on the cross that was missed. Maybe Brent Coleman.
Yes, it was Coleman.
It was Coleman. So, like, you have 4 golden, beautiful chances, and they don't get any of them to go in the net. And as soon as Dallas move up the pitch and get a corner, I'm like, I know how this is going to end. Like, when you get that many chances and nothing works, it's like this. I've seen this story. And Dallas scores a header on the corner. Same thing that doomed United in Colorado, not being able to keep guys marked in the box and corners. Heath said after the game that 4 of the last 6 goals they've given have been on set pieces on corners. So, like, you've seen the recipe. Looking at the chalkboard on the MLS website from this game, United had 9 passes that were noted in the MLS like tracking software as key passes. To have that many like key, important, good passes and not actually score is absurd to me.
Yeah, I mean it runs along a narrative though, and a theme that we've been talking about. I mean throughout the season, but specifically recently with like the struggles of the team, because for whatever reason, like finishing has become a real bugaboo of this team. And so often in the past, for years, that it just hasn't been the case quite as much because Christian Ramirez has existed and been in his usual form. And for whatever reason, he's really on a cold spell. And these things happen, but what's made it even worse is that no one on the team, it's becoming very clear, almost no one on the team can pick up that slack. And you want to point to Quintero and say it would be him, but, I mean, the dude is going to he always has numerous guys on him, and he's usually positioning himself in deeper positions, and he's usually the one creating most of these.
Yeah, he's the one providing all of this beautiful service. Like,
yes. So I don't know why Ramirez's cold spell is hurting the entire team, but that's also standard. If a starting striker for any team goes on a cold spell, it hurts the team, but I think it does put into focus the lack of secondary scoring on the team.
I have a point related to that I did not write last night, but I thought like some sites do like a 3 takeaways after a game. One of my 3 takeaways is Minnesota United score in this game if Miguel Ibarra is on the pitch and eligible to play. Whew. Ibarra gets goals this season. That's what he's done. I think he's the team's highest scorer this season. Like, if these chances are falling to Ibarra instead of any of the players that were on the pitch tonight, I think one of them goes in. That is a gut feeling, and it's one of those things that you have to acknowledge when talking about this game is that Miguel Ibarra was suspended. And it may have forced some interesting things to happen because we did see a significantly different formation in this game, which I am excited to get to talk to Nick about because I want to hear his thoughts about this. 3 at the back. How do you feel?
I think last night showed that it has potential, clearly. And I mean, when it comes to having I mean, it's not something that is completely foreign. It's very trendy in today's soccer, throughout the globe. So, I mean, it's something I've been begging Heath to do numerous times, is be more, risque in your decision making, and try to reach higher goals by trying different things. And so, I give him credit for that.
The thing that drew my attention that I thought of about as soon as I saw the lineup, when you see a back three, particularly the players used being Boxall, Kallman, and Omsberg, during and after the week in which Costa Rica were eliminated from the World Cup and Francisco Calvo is returning to the team, I am curious, because this seems like we have talked for months about ways to fit Kallman and Calvo in the team together. This is a system that does it just immediately. You slot Calvo right in there, we're good to go. Everything works, and it's hard. Go.
And also a huge part, and if any Minnesota United fans want to see this, what I'm about to say, live and in person and done at a high level, watch England. Because what this system could do for Minnesota United is put Calvo in the center of that back three and allow the team to more readily and more continuously use Calvo in possession retention and chance creation. And that's something that I've asked for in different writings for zonecoverage.com and different musings on this podcast, that if you can't and don't want to play Calvo in a center mid position, why not utilize him more as a center back who gets on the ball higher up the field? And potentially a back three does that. And if you want to watch that take place, you can very soon this week when John Stones plays for England, because that's how he operates. And it's a potentially great fit for Calvo in the team.
And it was we talked to Kallman and Ramirez after the game last night, and they both kind of had everybody we talked to last night had kind of the same thing to say about the system, which is that we worked on it in practice this week. This was a very clear goal and a plan going in. It took 10 to 15 minutes to get going, but when it got going for the last half an hour of the first half, Dallas got nothing offensively, and the chances were coming. Heath said the one adjustment he made at halftime was to get people to push up a little further up the pitch, specifically the Gomez and who was on the other wing back? Mears, to get Gomez and Mears to push up the pitch a little bit and just be in more offensive positions, because he didn't think they'd had enough people forward in the first half. And we saw what that did in the first 10, 15 minutes of the first half. This is a system that appeared to give United some of the most defensive solidarity they've had all season, while also still letting them counterattack, move at pace, and use the best parts of their offense.
Yeah, no, it's these are all the exact reasons it's become incredibly trendy to try and or use consistently across Europe.
And it seems like United have the personnel to play it.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're focusing on Calvo. I think the other what's the other recent revelation that makes this system potentially work very well? Alexi Gomez. Mm-hmm. And his ability to play at left wing back is something that again was previously unbeknownst to everyone, maybe, and now he's seen that, and Alexi's continued to prove that he can play well there, and that really opens up the options.
Yeah, Alexi had a couple of Alexi moments in the first half of this game, including I marked down the first moment when he took a shot that ended up in the 20th row. It was in the 18th minute. I was ready for it because I saw him shaping to shoot, and it's I know where this is going because it's not in the back of the net. But I thought he really came into the game in the second half and was a huge part of a lot of the chance creation. His chemistry with Darwin is in the second half, which I thought was interesting because they did change formations both of the times they made substitutions. They were getting some good link-up play from Gomez from his wide position to the attacking portion of the field, both with just Ramirez and Quintero up front, and after after they brought Mason Toy on. Like, there were pieces of all of that Gomez was seeing passes. Heath specifically called out how good of a night Gomez had seen in the passes that he was seeing in the second half. The vision was something that was very much there, and it's one of those things, like, I've complained about the accuracy, but vision is much harder to teach than getting the passing accuracy right. If he's seeing these passes and can execute them, that is a whole new element to making his game matter and fit in with what the attacking higher up the pitch portion of United is trying to do.
Absolutely. Again, we've seen, right, and this game's kind of another good example, and of like where we've seen moments where United can dominate play against a quality MLS opposition in FC Dallas, and other games where it's like there's no way they should be losing to San Jose. There's no excuse for losing to, these poor teams, the Colorado Rapids of the league. Why is this happening? There's plenty of good players on this team, and it makes you believe that it's just Heath isn't finding the exact way to unlock it. And obviously it's a very complex puzzle, but maybe this could be the way he solves it.
I very much want to see more of this formation moving forward, especially, like, you can talk all the trash you want about Francisco Calvo and the opening of the year he had in MLS. Calvo in for Wyatt Omsberg in this formation is nothing but a straight upgrade. That is no offense to Wyatt Omsberg. Calvo is a international player, World Cup veteran. Wyatt Omsberg is an MLS rookie. You bring him into this formation that already looked good. It is a significant upgrade.
And I think if you can utilize more of Calvo's skill set, which, as you're just alluding to, is very high, it can only benefit the team, you would think, especially in terms of the upside department.
Yeah, absolutely. So United do not have an easy week of schedule coming up. They play Toronto in Minnesota on Wednesday and then go to Houston for another game against the Dynamo on Saturday. So they've got a stretch of three games in 8 days here with an already pretty thin squad. So I'm interested to see. I want to see this formation come back again, and I want to see how you've got your midfield pieces. I want to see how Collin Martin, for one, would look in this formation, either as a substitute or as a starting player. You've got Maximiano, who can come in as another option in the defensive midfield part of the five. Like, there are options in the midfield portion of this for rotation that I want to see. You obviously worry about the forward portions of it, but like I think there's possibilities with this that I hadn't thought about before, and I really want to see more of it.
I'll give you another one that maybe you haven't thought of. An exciting thing about a back five is it can often be easier. And again, if he's mimicking his system at all to his native homeland of England's system, it potentially opens the door easier to fit in two strikers. And obviously when you have Christian, Mason, and Abu, three for one position, that's a tough fit. But if you're playing two strikers, maybe you can get two of those guys on the field. And when one of your team's biggest problems this season is finishing, it's always going to be better to get more strikers on the field. Which
we saw when they made the sub for Mason on, but they also did that by taking Wyatt Omsberg off. So they went to two center backs, but also went to like a 4-3-1-2 with Darwin behind the two strikers. That I like the look of that. Mason had a really good chance in like the 80th minute of this game. The one shot that was actually on target and forced a really good save from Dallas's goalkeeper. So that's like, this flexibility has some interesting stuff to it. So that said,
it'd be fascinating.
Let's talk some World Cup. We are into the bracket stage. Item number 1 on the agenda. Nic Hallett, did you have Sweden winning their group?
Oh, God.
I want to know what the odds on Sweden getting first place in that group were at the start of match day 3 for group Germany's group, because that's ridiculous. That was the outcome no one had. Nobody had that.
Nick bet on it, and that's why he's on vacation.
No, that was stunning. I couldn't believe it. I can't believe just by itself that Germany's knocked out, let alone Sweden finishing first in the group. It's amazing.
Because, nobody's going to talk about the fact that Sweden 3-0 Mexico swung the goal difference enough to get them to number one in the group, let alone, the ending of Germany-South Korea was phenomenal to watch. I've watched that in, 4 different languages. There are 2 different Korean broadcasts of the game, and both of their broadcasts of the first goal and the decision and discussion process under VAR are phenomenal to watch, even with no understanding.
I've not been privy to this. This sounds awesome.
I've been around the internet a little bit. A little bit. So what it does is Germany being out is shocking. I had talked to those games were, I think, on Wednesday. The night before that, I had talked to friend of Timberwolves podcasts aplenty, Ricardo Pretezi of Gazzetta dello Sport, who covers the NBA and many things. Ricardo and I were at a Lynx game together on Tuesday night, and we were talking about the World Cup because you do that. Neither of us have teams in the fold, obviously, with Italy's sad missing of the World Cup, but he picked Germany to win the World Cup.
Ricardo,
because it was a pretty safe pick, right? They were going to go through, and then once they get into the bracket stage, they can win a game against anybody with that team, and then they lay an egg and they're just out. Nick, Yogi Low loses his job over this, right?
You'd have to think. It's tough because he's also the guy who brought them their most recent championship and has brought them lots of success at international level. So, but you would have to think, especially because he's been in the job so long. But there's a chance he holds on to it. There's a chance.
Yep. I don't think it's 100% chance that he's gone. It's just they've never not made it out of the group stage.
Oh.
That doesn't happen. They've lost in the brackets before. They don't not make it out of the group stage.
What's even more startling is that it continues a recent trend of World Cup winners missing, being eliminated in the group stage for this being the 3rd or the 4th straight.
It's the 4th. I think it's the 4th out of the last 5 or 5th out of the last 6. It's been absurd.
It's insane. I don't know how that happens. That makes no sense to me. So, that makes even less sense than Germany being eliminated.
Shout out to South Korea, whose 2 goals were awesome, and my boy Heung-min Son scored the second one on an empty netter. And that's the biggest story coming out of Match Day 3. Argentina's survival, you could correctly predicted, even though they are now done.
One of the goals of the tournament for Messi in that game, by the way. Oh my.
Sure.
I mean, it was brilliant. It was brilliant.
I liked at least 2 of the French goals better.
Woo! Today?
Today.
No, I was
you're talking about Match Day 3. I was talking about
Match
today.
Day 3.
Match Day 3. That Messi goal was phenomenal. Yeah, that I'm with you.
That's what I'm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's
what I was talking about.
Even though I think even with that goals of the tournament, I still think I would take. What was the French defender's name today? Pavard's goal from France's second goal today was absurd.
Yes, it was. That Pavard will be in the top 10, but Messi.
There have been so many good goals this
Nigeria
tournament.
Would be in Messi from against Nigeria be in the top 3 right now.
Yep, I'd give you that. So we have a bracket. It's I think mostly as we expected. Mexico did slip to second in their group with their defeat, so which
is insanely rough because that means they have to play Brazil.
They did get smacked around by Sweden, so they they didn't deserve to get first, so they've got the Brazil draw, and that does mean that the bracket, which we talked a little bit about how it was shaping up last week, and we now see it in all of its glory this week, even with the first 2 games played out. The top half of the bracket is Uruguay, Portugal, France, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Belgium, Japan. Even just the first 5 teams I listed have a gazillion World Cup championships between them and are some of the best teams in the world with some of the best players. And then you have the bottom half.
That side of the bracket is robust.
And then you have the bottom half, which you have a struggling Spain side, Russia, Croatia, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Colombia, and England, who Croatia has looked like the best team in that half of the bracket pretty comfortably.
Yes, I would agree with that.
On their form in this tournament. Like, you can't count out Spain, and England have the pedigree that they should be plenty good enough to at least get to the semifinal from this side of the bracket. But, like...
And I would put Colombia be the next best team if James is healthy.
Yes, and James' health is such a big question coming into that game, with him having to go off after 31 minutes in Colombia's final group stage game.
Yes.
Kind of last talking point before we pick some quarterfinals. Do you have a better method of tie breaking than fair play points? For clarity, Senegal were eliminated from the World Cup because they had received more yellow cards than who was the second place in that group? That was that might have been Switzerland.
In Senegal, Japan, Colombia.
Oh, it was Japan.
Yeah, it was Japan.
So Japan went through over Senegal on fewer amount of yellow cards received. That was the tiebreaker that it went to because they'd scored the same number of goals, they had the same goal difference, the same points. Is there a better way to break this tie?
I mean, I think potentially, but honestly, I'm fine with it because I'm not going to have sympathy for you if you're not going to get the points you need to advance, and if you're not going to have the better goal differential. I mean, just if you didn't do those things, then you don't have a strong argument to that. We should advance because of blah blah blah. Even Senegal's coach said afterward, he was like, "We didn't deserve to advance." I mean, he didn't even argue. And then also, I mean, I think. It's called the beautiful game for a reason, and, as an offensive player myself, like, I'm with anything that encourages offense, and if you are tied at the end of 3 group stage matches on points and goal differential, and you have less yellow cards, that means you are playing the game more beautifully because you're not being rough and tumble and crushing into people constantly. You're playing the game cleaner. And I think that is actually commendable and, yeah, fair enough to be the 4th tiebreaker in that situation.
I feel that. Okay. Let's talk round of 16. Were you surprised by either result from today with both Ronaldo and Messi going out?
I was not. That's the only thing about it that is surprising is you can say that exact tagline that you just said is that those two go out, but from any other perspective, I'm not at all surprised. France is incredible and arguably the deepest team at this tournament, and their starters are amazing. And Mbappe showed today why when Ronaldo and Messi are gone, it's likely going to be him and Neymar, who happen to be on the same team right now, as arguably the next potentially 2 best players for the next 10 years.
Sorry, what's that you said about Harry Kane? I can't hear you over Harry Kane.
God.
That's a good one.
Right? It's pretty good one.
Yeah. I can't hear you over Paul Pogba and Marcus Rashford.
That's fair. That's fair. Paul Pogba, who does play for that French team.
Also plays that. But again, I like the tagline of like, oh, Messi and Ronaldo get knocked out. But actually, in 10 years, we might look back and be like, well, yeah, they had to go against Kylian Mbappe, who turned out to be one of the best, 20 players ever to play.
Okay,
too.
So that's all fair. Tell me about the Uruguay team.
Well, the Uruguay team is amazing because they're like they're a sick team, but their country is tiny. They only have like 3.5 million people, which is incredible. Frick, they got less people than Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they're sick. But they have arguably, a lot of national teams throw this around, but I think it's very much true with. You couldn't call it a golden generation because it's not enough players, but they have a golden nucleus of Diego Godin, Edinson Cavani, Luis Suarez, and you kind of throw Muslera and Jimenez in there too. This is a group that made it to, I believe, a semifinal. A couple World Cups ago, and have never made it. Have always made it to at least the quarterfinals there, and they just did it again today. So it's a group that's been there, done it, and their experience once again has shown how valuable that can be.
So my thoughts from these games are, I think that there is one other way that you can frame at least one of these ties that does make it look more surprising than just the easy Messi-Ronaldo line. It is the European champions going out in the round of 16, which I screwed up on a previous podcast, and I'm not screwing up this time. Portugal, while they have the reputation of being just a Ronaldo team, have some pretty decent players with them as well. So I think Uruguay winning that game is at least a little bit of a surprise, regardless of their quality, regardless of their experience. Yeah,
it was a game that, you're not wrong, but it was a game that's it was, I think, actually 538.com's percentage was 55% chance Portugal wins, 45% Uruguay wins.
It wasn't a huge upset, but
yeah, it's a relative coin flip going into the game. And if we want to be, if we want to get into the weeds a little bit on that European Championship, as much as Portugal completely deserved credit and walked away with the trophy, I think France actually was the better team in that tournament, and they just happened to lose the final. I think France actually should have, on the run of play, should have won the last year.
And with that said, it's kind of a bummer we don't get a replay of that in the quarterfinals, because that would have been a fun game.
And let's think about it like this: if you want to project, it would have been. If you want to project forward too, again, I'm just coming off a boat off of a lake. Maybe had a few Bud Light.
Oh God! Too.
But if let's pretend France had beat Portugal at the last Euros, that would have set up a trend of in 2008 Spain wins the Euros, and then in 2010 wins the World Cup, and then Germany in 2012 wins the Euros, and then in 2014 wins the World Cup, and then France wins the 2016 Euros, which they didn't, but we're pretending they did. That projects them to win this World Cup.
Yep. And Portugal failed to solidify that trend with them winning Euros and now falling out in this stage.
Right. Right. But you have my expertise explaining that actually Portugal got a bit lucky in the final, and it should have been France. So now people can go spend big money in Vegas and bet France to take the World Cup.
All right. There you go. How big of a deal for...
I'm just trying to help the people win money,
How big of a deal for this quarterfinal matchup is Edinson Cavani's health?
Massive. Absolutely massive. It was such a bizarre situation that he was he immediately signaled that he needed the substitute, but he didn't seem that bummed. So I'm going to just project that he knows his body very well and knows that it's just a few days that he needs to be out and he'll be okay. But it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah, and talking about Cavani, if you have not watched highlights from this game or watched any part of Uruguay-Portugal yet, Uruguay's 2 goals, both which were scored by Cavani, I think are great watches because Cavani is a player that's so interesting to watch when he's off the ball as a striker. The run that he made to create the space for his first goal was amazing to watch. And it's little things, but he does just enough to get the space and be in the right place for the pass from Luis Suarez that it was perfect. And he's a player who has been in that not the top 2 conversation, but in the top 5, top 10, top 15 conversation for parts of his career, and it's cool to see him go like this on the world stage.
That's a great way to put it. So many people think Messi, Ronaldo, Neymar. Cavani is in that same tier. He's not in the top 5, but he is consistently in the top 20, top 15 consistently. So he is completely the definition of the utmost upper echelon players in the world.
Yep, for sure. And looking ahead, we have tomorrow we have the start of the junior bracket, if you will. You have plucky underdog Spain going up against the big strong home team Russia. Nic Hallett, who do you have going through in Spain Russia?
Man, it would be kind of fun if Russia won. Honestly, the host nations consistently do well in these things.
If Russia
underwhelmed.
If Russia wins this game, every result of the lower bracket is a win because it means one of Russia, Croatia, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Colombia, and England are going to the final.
Oh, God.
Like
that's a great point,
that's a
too.
great result for neutral.
Completely agree. In fact, and again, like host nations, the wildest upsets that have happened in these type of tournaments always come from like the host nation. I'm calling it now. I think Russia's going to knock them down. I'm actually kind
of with that take. Like, I don't think Spain have been that convincing, and Russia have had moments, even if against bad teams, of being able to actually be productive, get goals when there were very low expectations on them coming into this tournament. So it would be a pretty sizable upset, but I certainly don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility. And as you pointed out, home teams do weird things.
Yeah, man, and if Russians wouldn't have been motivated enough playing in their home country's World Cup, now like you joked, they're on the junior side of the bracket, and if they win this game, it's a very real possibility they can keep going. So they're going to be running through brick walls tomorrow. It's going to be awesome.
Yep, I think it's going to be a really fun game. I'll be glad to get up at 9 for that. Give me a percentage chance of Denmark beating Croatia.
Honestly, I mean, as good as Croatia are, they're not like a dominant powerhouse. So, like, every game that they'll be in from now on is still going to be a game. But, I mean, it's a good example of, like, how many, like, stud midfielders they have in comparison to Denmark, because Denmark only has the one.
Yep.
And Croatia has at least 4 to 5 absolute stars in the midfield. So, yeah, Croatia's got to be the fairly heavy favorite. But that game honestly could go any which way and could go, extra time, 0-0, to pens, and then it's anyone's guess. But I would take the experience of Modric, and co to see that out and take that game in regular time. So I'd give Denmark a 20% chance.
Yep, I think 20 is about right. That was the number I was thinking. Like, Croatia are in really good form. Knockout matches, anything can happen, but it feels like such a mismatch in parts of the pitch. Like, and do not get me wrong, my love for Christian Eriksen is great. My love for Luka Modric has a lot of history. So I don't know, and Modric, like, it's exactly like you framed it perfectly. Modric is a wonderful player who's having a great tournament. He's not the only player in Croatia that matters. They've got a great team, and like I like this Croatia team to go to the final. Like, it's a pretty easy pick based on form.
I like that call.
I think I really like Croatia to go to the final.
I like that call. That's an educated, sexy call.
Woo! I'll take it. So we'll go faster on the ties for Monday and Tuesday. Brazil, Mexico. Are the Mexicans going to do it?
That game's going to be so lit. That game's going to be so good.
I wish it wasn't Monday morning at 9.
I completely agree. I literally cried one tear when I saw that it was at 9 a.m. on Monday, because it's such a bummer. I actually was going to go watch that game with a family of Mexicans at their restaurant that they own in Minneapolis.
Yep.
But I don't know if I can make it at 9 a.m. But, yeah, that game's going to be awesome. I really believe Mexico has a legitimate chance.
I do too.
really feel like that game's like 60-40. Brazil's favored, but it's closer than people might think.
Yep, I'm with that. Belgium, Japan. Japanese going to pull the upset?
No chance. 0 chance. Belgium is going to smash.
Belgium, yeah.
Yeah, Tom is extremely with your take. I agree. I don't think Japan is winning that game. I like Belgium a lot.
Tom's not waffling on this one.
Yeah. Woo.
Ugh. And then you have I think the last games of the round of 16 are both really interesting, partially because like Sweden-Switzerland was not a game I have power ranked in my head before.
Yeah, not at all.
I haven't thought much about how that game goes. Nic Hallett, what is your very educated pick for Sweden-Switzerland?
It's you don't I don't think it's wildly bold, but I think one, I'll just say from a viewer standpoint, that game will be awesome because it's so 50-50 that it's just a game, and that's great for everyone. But actually, Switzerland's coming into this tournament was ranked top 10 in the FIFA rankings, so they're legit, and they're very much a team, and they have a few stars, so they'll be the slight favorite going in. But that game will just be a good for all neutrals.
And the last one, Colombia, England. Do you believe that the World Cup is coming home?
It's got a better chance than it has in a long time. I do really like this England team, but we talk about golden generations. This, if James is available, this is again another kind of golden generation for Colombia, and that game is another. If James is completely healthy, that game is completely 50-50.
Yep,
it's going to be awesome.
And England will always have the possibility to go full England and just completely blow it. That's the other thing with any England game in a knockout match.
Oh yeah, England goes up 2-0 in the first half. Do not move from your seat. Anything could happen.
Yeah, that'll make it even more interesting when they lose 4-3.
Exactly. I will be watching that game at an English friend of mine's house.
I will be watching all of the games on Monday and Tuesday at work. And I have no shame whatsoever about that.
Hopefully your work doesn't listen to this podcast.
I have already cleared with my supervisor that we are allowed to have World Cup games on.
And
I
gamble
don't care. So they'll be on at work. We watched what game do we watch at work this week with we had it was Portugal's previous game. We watched I forget who they knocked out in their final game, but that was we sat and watched that game, had a lot of fun with it, talked through it. I talk a lot about soccer with the kids that I work with, even though I'm obviously I'm not the coach that Nick is, but the book I'm currently reading is a book called Inverting the Pyramid, which is by author and journalist Jonathan Wilson, who writes for The Guardian and a number of other places about the history of tactics in soccer. Which is awesome. It's a really interesting read. It talks about how originally when the game kind of developed, you had maybe one guy defend and everybody else just kind of runs the other. The formations were numbers like 2 at the back and then 1 in the middle and then 7 forwards. And in the 20s and 30s was actually when it changed to 3 at the back. Which still allowed you to put an extremely attacking team forward, but gave more defensive solidarity. And it talked also, we talk about Uruguay. If you're not as attentive to the history of soccer, Uruguay won the first World Cup in 1930 and have a long history of being a great soccer nation even with their small size. So if you're looking for a book recommendation, it's a really good one. I've read it before. I have a couple of books by Jonathan Wilson. There are a couple of my favorite soccer books out there. So if you're looking for a book recommendation, that's where it's at. With that said, we will be back at you next week. Tom Schreier will not be with us, so recording's going to be interesting, but Nick and I will get it done.
It'll be classy.
It'll be an experience for everybody. It'll
definitely be on time.
Okay. All right.
It'll get recorded at 3 a.m. on a Sunday night, because Nick and I are both creatures of the night.
Hey, Arif, what are you doing here?
Yeah, that would be pretty fun. We will be through.
As long as I can call in from New Zealand.
We can make it work. Skype's a beautiful invention. We'll be through all of the round of 16 and all of the quarterfinals. So we'll have a lot of World Cup to talk about. We'll have 2 Minnesota United games to talk through because we got the Wednesday game and the Saturday game, and lots of content to go through next week. So we'll get her done. For Nick, Prince Hallett, Carmen San Diego Hallett, Tom Schreier at tschreier3 on Twitter, and myself, David Naylor, at Prof. Cedar. Check out our written work on zone coverage. Listen to all the podcasts on the Zone Coverage Podcast Network, and we will see you next week. Happy holidays.